Al-Isra. After the Prophet performed the evening prayer, Isha, Jibreel came to him with a white animal, slightly larger than a donkey, yet smaller than a mule. This animal was the Buraq, one of the animals of paradise. Jibreel held the Buraq by his ear and told the Prophet to mount it. When the Prophet was mounted, the Buraq set forth. The Buraq is a very fast animal. The length of the Buraq's stride is the furthest distance its eye can see. The Prophet and Jibreel arrived to a land with palm trees. Jibreel told the Prophet to dismount and pray. So the Prophet dismounted the Buraq and prayed 2 rak'ahs. Jibreel asked him, "Do you know where you prayed?" And the Prophet answered, "Allah knows best." Jibreel told him, "This is Yathrib, this is Taiba." These are 2 names for the city of Al-Madinah. Before the Prophet immigrated to Al-Madinah, it was called Taiba and Yathrib. It earned the name of Al-Madinah after the Prophet immigrated to it. The Buraq continued with the Prophet and Jibreel until they reached another place. Again, Jibreel told the Prophet to get down and pray. The Prophet dismounted there and prayed 2 rak'ahs. Jibreel informed the Prophet of the name of that place. It was Tur Sina. Once again, the Buraq took off with the Prophet and Jibreel. Once again it stopped, and the Prophet dismounted and prayed 2 rak'ahs. This was in Beit Lahm, where Prophet Isa, Jesus, was born. Then the Buraq continued with the Messenger of Allah until they entered the city of Jerusalem. There the Prophet went to Masjid al-Aqsa. Outside was a ring used by the messengers of Allah to tie their animals. The Prophet tied his Buraq to this ring. Then the Prophet entered the masjid where Allah assembled for him all the prophets, from Adam to Isa. Prophet Muhammad moved forward and led them all in prayer. This is an indication the Prophet is higher in status than all the rest of the prophets and messengers. On Prophet Muhammad's journey from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa, Allah enabled him to see some of his wondrous creations. Allah enabled the Prophet to see the world, dunya, like an old woman. However, this old woman was wearing a great deal of jewelry, and this there is an indication signifying the reality of the world. Allah enabled the Prophet to see Iblis. The Prophet saw something on the side of the road, which did not dare to stand in his way or speak to him. What the Prophet saw was Iblis. Originally, Iblis was a believer and lived with the angels in paradise. When Allah ordered the angels to prostrate, sujood, to Prophet Adam, Iblis was ordered to prostrate to him as well. The angels prostrated to Adam in obedience to Allah, because angels do not disobey Allah. However, Iblis did not obey, and he objected to the order of Allah. He said, "You created me out of fire, and you created him out of clay. How do you order me to prostrate to him?" So this objection by Iblis to the order of Allah was the first blasphemy he committed. On his journey, the Prophet smelled a very nice odor. He asked Jibreel about this pleasant scent, and Jibreel informed him this good smell was coming from the grave of the woman whose duty used to be to comb Pharaoh's daughter's hair. This woman was a good, pious believer. One day, as she was combing Pharaoh's daughter's hair, the comb fell from her hand. At this she said, "Bismillah." Pharaoh's daughter asked her, "Do you have a God other than my father?" The woman said, "Yes, my Lord and the Lord of your father is Allah." Pharaoh's daughter told her father what had happened. Pharaoh demanded this woman blasphemes and leaves Islam. but she refused. At that, Pharaoh threatened to kill her children. He brought a great pot of water and built a great fire under it. When the water boiled, Pharaoh brought her children and started to drop them into that pot, one after the other. Throughout all this, the woman remained steadfast to Islam, even when Pharaoh reached her youngest child. A little boy still breastfeeding, but she felt pity for him. At that, Allah enabled this child to speak. He said to his mother, "O mother, be patient. The torture of the hereafter is far more severe than the torture of this life, and do not be reluctant, because you are right." At this, the woman requested Pharaoh collect her bones and the bones of her children, and buries them in the same grave. Pharaoh promised her that, then dropped her into that boiling water. The good odor the Prophet smelled coming from her grave is an indication of her high status. During his trip, the Prophet saw people whose lips and tongues were clipped with scissors made of fire. Jibril told the Prophet, "These are the speakers of sedition, fitna, who call people to misguidance." He also saw a bull, which exited a very small outlet, then was trying in vain to return through that small outlet. Jibril told the Prophet, "This is the example of the bad word. Once spoken, it cannot be returned." The Prophet saw people grazing like animals, with very little clothing on their private parts. Jibril told the Prophet, "These are the ones who refused to pay zakat." The Prophet saw angels smashing some people's heads with rocks. These heads would return to the shape they had been, and then the angels would smash their heads again, and so on. Jibril told the Prophet, "These are the ones whose heads felt too heavy to perform prayer, the ones who used to sleep without praying." On his journey, the Prophet saw people who were competing to eat some rotten meat, ignoring meat that was sliced and unspoiled. Jibril told the Prophet, "These are people from your nation who leave out that which is permissible, halal, and consume that which is forbidden, haram." This reference was to the fornicators, that is, the ones who left out the permissible marriage and committed sins, fornication. Also, the Prophet saw people who were drinking from the fluid coming from the bodies of the fornicators, water mixed with blood. Jibril indicated to the Prophet that these were the ones who were drinking the alcohol that is prohibited in this world. The Prophet saw people scratching their faces and chests with brass fingernails. Jibril said, "These are the examples of those who commit gossip, ghiba." Al-Mirach. After the Prophet took this night journey from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa, he ascended to the upper heavens. The Prophet ascended to the heavens on stairs called al-Mirqat, in which one step is made of gold and the next of silver, and so on. These stairs are veiled from us. The Prophet ascended these stairs until he reached the first heaven. When the Prophet and Jibril arrived at the first heaven, Jibril requested the gate to be opened. The angel assigned to that gate asked Jibril, "Who is with you?" Jibril answered, "It is Muhammad." The angel asked Jibril, "Was he dispatched? Is it time for him to ascend to the heaven?" Jibril said yes. So the gate was opened for him, and Prophet Muhammad entered the first heaven. There, Prophet Muhammad saw Prophet Adam. To Adam's right, the Prophet saw some bodies, and to Adam's left, other bodies. If Adam would look to his right, he would laugh, and if he would look to his left, he would cry. Adam was seeing the souls of his descendants. Those on his right were his descendants who would die as believers, and those on his left were his descendants who would die as non-believers. Then the Prophet ascended to the second heaven. In this second heaven was where Prophet Muhammad saw Prophets Isa and Yahya. Isa and Yahya are cousins. Their mothers were sisters. They welcomed the Prophet and made supplication, dua for him for good things. The Prophet ascended to the third heaven, where he found Prophet Yusuf. Prophet Yusuf was extremely handsome. Allah bestowed half the beauty on Yusuf. Yusuf received the Prophet with a warm welcome and made supplication, dua for him for good things. Then the Prophet ascended to the fourth heaven, where he found Prophet Idris. Idris welcomed the Prophet and made supplication, dua for him for good things. In the fifth heaven, the Prophet encountered Harun, the brother of Prophet Musa. In the sixth heaven, he encountered Prophet Musa. Each of these prophets received Prophet Muhammad with a warm welcome and made supplication, dua for him for good things. Then the Prophet ascended to the seventh heaven, and that is where our messenger saw Prophet Ibrahim. Prophet Ibrahim is the best of the prophets after our Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet saw Prophet Ibrahim with his back against Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur. To the inhabitants of the skies, Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur is like the Kaaba is to us, the inhabitants of the earth. Every day 70,000 angels go there, then exit from it and never return. The next day another 70,000 angels go and come out and never return. This will continue until the day of judgment. In this there is an indication as to the greatness of the numbers of the angels. Their numbers are far more than the numbers of the humans and jinn together. In the seventh heaven, Prophet Muhammad saw Sidrat al-Muntaha, a very big tree of Sidr. Each of the fruits of this tree is as large as a big jar. The leaves of this tree are similar to the ears of the elephants. Sidrat al-Muntaha is an extremely beautiful tree. Butterflies made of gold visit it.
In heaven.
When these butterflies gather on this tree, its beauty is beyond description. Then the Prophet ascended to what is beyond the seven skies. He entered paradise. He saw examples of the inhabitants of paradise and how their situation would be. He saw most of the inhabitants of paradise are the poor people. The Prophet saw other things on the night of his ascension. He saw Malik, the angel in charge of the hellfire. Malik did not smile at the Prophet when he saw him, and the Prophet asked why. In answer to the Prophet's question, Jibreel said, Malik did not smile since the day Allah created him. Had he smiled for anyone, he would have smiled for you. In paradise, the Prophet saw some of the bounties Allah prepared for the inhabitants of paradise. He saw the Hur al-Ain, females Allah created who are not humans or jinn. They are in paradise and will be married to those men Allah willed them to marry. The Prophet saw the Wildan al-Mukhalladun, creations of Allah who are not human, jinn or angels. They are a very beautiful creation of Allah, whose appearance is like laid out pearls. They are servants of the inhabitants of paradise. The least in status of the people of paradise will have 10,000 Wildan al-Mukhalladun to serve him. Each one of them would carry a tray of gold in one hand and a tray of silver in the other hand. The Prophet saw the throne, Arsh, which is the ceiling of paradise. The throne is the largest creation of Allah in size. Allah did not create anything bigger in size than it. The seven heavens and the earth in comparison to the Kursi are like a ring thrown in a desert, and the Kursi in comparison to the throne is like a ring thrown in a desert. The seven heavens and the earth in comparison to the throne are like a seed of